Don't forget, this was not just any old Prime Minister. She'd been there for 11 years, she'd won 3 general elections. She was almost, without question, the preeminent politician on the world stage. Philip Johnston, I'm the chief leader writer of the Daily Telegraph. Back in 1990, I was the chief political correspondent, and I was in Paris on the day that Margaret Thatcher fell. The following year, a number of events happened. One of them was a summit meeting in Rome in October 1990, which I covered, funnily enough, with a young European correspondent called Boris Johnston. He and I were covering this summit together, and in fact it was quite an impact on his view of Europe subsequently. And the idea that Margaret Thatcher attended to oppose the move in Europe to a single currency, which at that time was just a nascent idea among a few believers in Europe as a political project, which of course she opposed quite vehemently.
Europe will be stronger precisely because it has France as France, Spain as Spain, Britain as Britain. It would be folly to try to fit them into some sort of identikit European personality.
At that summit, she was shanghaied, I suppose. She found herself isolated, and an agreement was made to move to European Monetary Union. She then went back to Parliament 2 days later to make a statement on this, and famously denounced the whole thing. No, 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 she said.
No, no, no.
At that point, Sir Geoffrey Howe, who was her deputy and leader of the House of Commons, decided he'd had enough, so he walked out of the cabinet.
Sir Geoffrey, silent in the 12 days since his resignation, had taken a lonely decision to tell all that was in his heart about Margaret Thatcher's method of running her cabinet.
And that triggered the moment where Michael Heseltine, who was to challenge her for the leadership, put his name forward for a vacancy. The rules at the time were absolutely extraordinary. They allowed one Conservative MP and one nominee to challenge an incumbent Prime Minister. The Berlin Wall had just fallen. This was something for which she could take great credit, and she was determined to go to the summit meeting in Paris to chart the post-European architecture, post-Cold War architecture. At the same time, at home, she was being denounced for all sorts of things, from the poll tax to her anti-European stance. I went to Paris as political correspondent to cover the summit, but also to be with her when the result came through. As a political correspondent, met her a few times. I travelled a bit with her. She was a very intimidating individual, extremely inclined to argue and engage as well. If you were to say something injudicious in a small group of people, she was a towering individual. Because it was in Paris and the whole thing was in the open because of the summit, it added to that sense of drama. And in this beautiful courtyard with the residence of the British ambassador, it was like a backdrop to an extraordinary event, which it was an extraordinary event. The Prime Minister is at the residence of the British ambassador in Paris. She's about to go out to the ballet, which is the final evening of the summit, but essentially this cloud hung over the entire day, which was back in Westminster. The Conservative MPs were voting on whether or not she should remain as leader.
Press harassment. Yes, go away.
It was dark. There were arc lights outside the British ambassador's residence. There was a great gaggle of British journalists, press journalists in the corner. There was a load of cameras. Outside in the street, there were hundreds of foreign journalists. So when the moment came for the vote, which was about 6:30 in the evening, she did win. But she didn't win by enough. In fact, she was 4 votes short of getting to the point where she could just carry on.
What went wrong was that we did not get a big enough majority on the first ballot. And there's nothing I could do to cure that. That was the thing I couldn't get over.
The odd thing about the rules of the party at the time were not only did you have to win by 50%, you had to get 15%, beyond 50%. She beat Michael Heseltine, but she didn't reach a threshold that had been set, a pretty daft one really, that you had to get 50% plus 15%.
I had a majority on the first ballot, but I did not have a sufficient majority.
She didn't even wait, or she didn't even consult anybody. She just got up and just walked out and came out of the door, and then off she went to the ballet. I was standing downstairs in the courtyard behind the BBC correspondent John Sargent, who tried to shove a microphone in her face and got pushed out of the way by Bernard Ingham, her press secretary. It's a very famous image.
This is the microphone.
I'm naturally very pleased that I got more than half.
We were just standing there rather stunned, to be honest, and I wasn't quite sure I'd even got the shorthand correct because we were all so stupefied by it. But of course it was being beamed back to London, where there was total consternation at the time, as MPs tried to work out what it all meant.
A few members of our party have actually brought the Prime Minister down.
How will the world see it, do you think?
I think they will be amazed, absolutely amazed.
So yes, fully aware that we were on the cusp of some historic moment. In fact, at the time I remember saying to a colleague, I shouldn't think we'll ever cover a bigger story than this. It was, I can't say any more than that really, it was just the sheer drama of it all and her disappearing to the ballet dressed to kill, but as it turns out, dressed for the end. We went for a briefing with Bernard Ingham, her press secretary, who said, well, you heard what she said, she's disappointed, but she carries on. And then when everybody had gone, myself and another colleague and Bernard sat down to raid the ambassador's drinks cabinet and have a talk over her 10, 12, 11 years in office. And Bernard acknowledged then, as he has acknowledged subsequently, that that was it. So the next day, we all went back to London.
Mrs. Thatcher, when are you going to resign?
And she consulted members of her cabinet. That was in the House of Commons in her office behind the Speaker's chair. And it was a steady procession of cabinet ministers would go in. First one was Ken Clarke. And she asked them, what should I do? And they said, you've got to go.
We're all sad, but it's the right decision because she's gone in a noble way instead of being ignobly beaten, which would have been terrible.
I think we're all feeling a sense of shock and a sense of identity with how she must be feeling herself.
Bernard Ingham, in his memoirs, has said that it was a traumatic experience. Those are his words.
Yes, it was. And it would have been very strange if it hadn't been. But we got through it.
In fact, you broke down.
We got through the House.
You broke down during that cabinet, didn't you?
Yes, but I carried on.
The mood was electric. The Labour Party tabled a motion of no confidence, which was to be heard on the Thursday, which the Tories would have won easily because they had a majority of 100, but I mean, it was part of the politics. And the next morning, she resigned.
Good evening. The Prime Minister states her intention to resign.
Even now, over 12 hours on, you have to pinch yourself to realise it, but the Thatcher era is over.
There were two moments that spring to mind. First of all, she stayed on for a few weeks, and that involved her giving a speech in the House of Commons on the Labour Party's motion of no confidence.
By that time, I was back fighting fit, as you saw.
I'm enjoying this.
Which was easily the best speech she ever made in the House of Commons, quite dramatic. In fact, my report of it was on the front page of the Telegraph the following day, and still one of my cherished cuttings. It ended by saying the look on the faces of the Conservative MPs was, what have we done?
They're cowards. They did it because they were trying to save their seats. And they hid behind, most of them, behind the cloak of anonymity. And the effect has been that someone who has been elected 3 times by 30 million people has been turfed out by 150.
And then 2 or 3 days later, she went to a cabinet meeting in the morning, and then she left number 10 Downing Street to go to the Queen and hand in a resignation. And she was seen in her car welling up with tears.
3 words summed it up, and there was really nothing else that people wanted to talk about. At Buckingham Palace, the crowds that had gathered for the changing of the guard suddenly found that they were in a prime position to witness a piece of history.
I don't think she was in with a fair chance from now on. I don't think she'd ever have the same credibility.
I'm very, very sorry about it, but I think she's done a wise thing.
She was, I think, regarded as with the greatest esteem of all world leaders.
I was a winner. I never lost a national election. Never.
From the Conservative MP's point of view, it was self-preservation as much as anything else.
This is a typically brave and selfless decision by the Prime Minister.
They thought if we carry on to the next election with her, we'll lose. If we get somebody else, we might win. As it turned out, they were right. They did get somebody else, John Major, and they did win. So these were huge epoch-making events from the Conservative Party's point of view.
People have been grumbling for a long time. It's very, very easy to grumble. It's going to be a very different situation now, and I think the whole world is going to miss her enormously.
The divisions within the party between those who supported Margaret Thatcher and those who thought she should go were never healed for years. Arguably, they still haven't been healed.
Should we stop there for a second?
The first emotion you feel as a journalist is what a great story it is. It was to recognise the fragility of political power, however powerful you are.
She has been an outstanding Prime Minister for the United Kingdom and an outstanding friend of the United States.
The Conservative Party can get rid of a Prime Minister who'd won 3 general elections, was regarded as the world's premier statesman, who just effectively played a leading role in winning the Cold War. You can get rid of anybody.